Hello, thank you for joining us here on 2 News Nevada. My name is Jaden Urban. Sitting across from me is Senator Catherine Cortez Masto. Senator, thank you for coming down to sit with us. So as we kind of roll into the new year, how are things going up there in Washington, and what are some of your priorities now that we're, a few weeks now into 2026?
Yeah, I think as I think most people know here in Nevada, if you're spending any time, there's still high costs. People are struggling. My family, I see it in our neighbors. As I get around the state, and I've been talking to so many people throughout the state, it's a tough time. High grocery costs, high energy costs, housing costs. I mean, they're feeling it. Healthcare costs. There was a study that was recently done, independent study that shows that an average family paid $300 more in their groceries from 2024 to 2025. So it is real. It is happening, and rightfully so. Families and individuals are looking for solutions, right? They want Congress to say, okay, how do we address this? How do we focus on them and lower costs and look at addressing their needs? That, for me, is where this starts. That's my priority. What's the legislation? What can we do in a bipartisan way? How do we keep the focus on our families and not other things that are happening out there? And to me, that's what we should be doing in Congress.
And what would you kind of say right now is sort of I know you've been home for a little bit now, but kind of the energy up there in Washington, D.C., would you feel that there's a little bit more of a bipartisan effort to work across the aisle up in Washington right now?
Yeah, there's both. So what you will see on the national media, rightfully so, is a lot of chaos and confusion, because it is happening and people feel it and it's real. But there's also some good bipartisan legislation, right, that is getting done. To me, that's where it starts. How do we work together? Because that's how the system's set up. That's what we should be doing. If you have challenges in your state, I have challenges in mine. They're similar. Let's introduce a piece of legislation. Let's work on it together. That's the postal legislation that I introduced to protect our mail, to keep it here, rightfully so, in Reno, is bipartisan. I'm working with Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee, because we also have concerns in our rural communities as well as urban, that we want to protect individuals' right to access their mail, their prescription drugs that come in, anything that is necessary. We need to ensure that those post offices stay where they are, and there's community input if there is any type of change or recommended changes. So that happens a lot. I'd rather talk about that, because I think people need to see that there is some bipartisan work being done. Don't get me wrong, there are challenges that we have to address. This administration has imposed tariffs that are absolutely, this blanket tariffs, part of the uncertainty and the high costs we're dealing with, and we have to push back against it. I support strategic tariffs, but not these blanket tariffs. And you can talk to any of our small businesses, any individuals around here. Talk to folks that own a coffee company. Part of the challenges they're dealing with are the tariffs. And that may not be the sole thing, but part of it is the tariffs. That's why I fought for legislation to roll back the tariffs on coffee. We never had tariffs on coffee in this country ever, because most of the coffee is imported out of state, or out of the country. So let's take it back there. Why are we unnecessarily increasing grocery costs for families? That's kind of common sense, and that's where we should start.
And so that postal service legislation, I think, is important to touch on, because some folks might be confused. For our viewers at home, they're like, well, didn't the USPS already say that mail processing is not going to Sacramento? So can we just maybe explain for our viewers what your legislation is trying to do to kind of set the state up for better protections in the future?
That's right. We know that our fight here in Reno was to protect our mail service here for so many reasons. And we had to fight to protect it because, unbeknownst to us, the postal decision came from the postmaster without any input from anyone. And was a decision they made as a business strategic decision. They didn't talk to any of the Congress, members of Senate, where it was impacting, or the community. We don't want that to happen ever again. So my legislation said if the postmaster, if he decides he wants to make a decision like that, first he has to go to a postal commission, regulatory commission, and say, here's my plan, and give his reasons behind it. And then part of that, he has to come to Congress and say, here's what I'm thinking, and see the impact to our members of Congress and have us weigh in. And then most importantly, he has to go to the community and explain why this is a business decision that will work for this community. Because we know, particularly here in Nevada, that if our mail goes from normally where it was processed here in Reno to Sacramento, not only is it going to delay that mail, whether it's for your prescription drugs or you might get benefits at the federal level that you're relying on, or mail-in ballots. But what we also know is that pass, it gets snow, it's hard to get through that pass at times. It's going to further delay our mail. That's something we know because we live in this community. It may not be something our postmaster knows, Postmaster General, but he needs to now find out. And that's why this legislation is important, because it mandates they come into our communities and talk with us and get input.
And another big piece, especially with what's going on with the Capitol, specifically on the House side of things today, is that Department of Homeland Security appropriation bill. Kind of seen some back and forth on it today. Congressman Steve Horsford said today that he would be voting against it. Have you looked at the legislation yet, and overall, what are your thoughts? Obviously, you know, funding for ICE is a pretty hot button topic right now.
Well, yeah, let me just say this. First of all, I think anybody can watch the national news, either find out what's happening here, but nationally, and realize and be outraged and realize that this ICE enforcement is over the top. It's unreasonable. It is too aggressive, and it is violating not only immigrants and their rights and not going after the most violent criminals, they're violating U.S. citizens' rights. And so I introduced legislation to say, first of all, why is this happening? And why do they have so much money? What most people don't realize, in the Republican tax bill that was passed last year, the Republicans passed legislation to give more funding to ICE. $75 billion to ICE over 4 years. Now, their normal budget is only $10 billion a year. So they've more than tripled their budget for ICE. And because ICE has that much money, what we know is happening is that they are onboarding officers very quickly. They've lowered their standards for hiring these ICE officers, and the training is no longer the long-term training that we have seen for law enforcement in this country, particularly at a federal level. So these people are coming into our communities, they're under-trained, right? They're underqualified, and they have a mandate from their leaders, a quota mandate. Now, I don't know of any local law enforcement that has a quota mandate, because that's not how you keep communities safe. That's not public safety. And so, rightfully so, people are outraged. And so I introduced legislation, said we've got to get ICE back to a time when they're, yes, securing our border, right, to address the drug trafficking, human trafficking, and have an orderly immigration process, and get them back to a time where they're working within our communities with our local law enforcement to go after those violent criminals. To date, ICE, because of these ridiculous, outrageous, reckless actions, they've arrested over, 100 U.S. citizens. Most of the people that they have detained, their own statistics show less than 5% are violent criminals. So what is going on? And we see it happening every day. So yes, we should be outraged. So part of this for me is, let's take that excess money that the Republicans gave them and give it to our local law enforcement. Give it to our police officers who believe in community policing, who know and are trained in de-escalation, who understand and respect the rights, constitutional rights of U.S. citizens, as well as respect the rights of all citizens and individuals within their communities, and rely on community policing and building trust within a community to keep members safe, and yes, still go after the violent criminals. That is part of this legislation that I've introduced. Take that $75 billion, put $30 billion to more cops, put another $45 billion into a Burn JAG grant that's already there that helps train our local officers, that goes to victim assistance programs and prevention programs. There's some good work that's happening in our community. I just came from the sheriff's office here at Washoe County. They have an incredible unit. Most people have no idea that they have law enforcement and our mental health professionals working together within our jails to get people with mental health issues that are coming through the jails because they've committed a misdemeanor or some crime, and get them on track to address their mental health needs. It is one of the first in the country. They've received an award. Most people in Washoe have no idea that's happening. That's the kind of work we want in our communities, to help one another, not to stoke fear. Because I will tell you right now, what the administration is doing is not creating a public safety in our communities. It is doing just the opposite with these ICE officers.
And when you mean local law enforcement officers, this would be stretched across the nation, correct? Just for a clarification. So how would that impact us here in Nevada? Like, do we have a rough estimate of number of how much would come to the Silver State in terms of for the local law enforcement
We
component?
do, because most of the funding that we have coming in for local law enforcement, not only in Nevada, across the country, comes through the More Cops grants or through the Burn JAG grant funding. And so we get a piece of that. So there will be the ability for our law enforcement to utilize those funds to hire more officers. The amount of money we're looking at a national level for More Cops would actually allow communities across the country to hire about 200,000 more local police officers. But some of that could benefit our community. And we should, because as I talk to our local law enforcement, they're understaffed and they're overwhelmed. You just talked to the local law enforcement in Minneapolis. If you listen to that police chief, he's understaffed and he's overwhelmed now by the excessive force that these ICE officers are engaging in and the violation of those U.S. citizens' rights. They're calling 911, they're calling their local police for protection. So it is a problem that needs to be addressed in this country.
And so with, kind of looking at where things are at with that DHS appropriation bill, have you came up with a decision on where your vote would go in the event that that comes over for a vote?
So
on
it's
the
still
Senate
be voting
side?
on, it's voting, they're voting on it right now.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, we're looking at it, my team and I are looking, because as it comes over the Senate, it's a little different. It's going to be coming over, my understanding, as a full package. It is not going to be separated out like you see on the House side. So we are looking at it, if there's any changes. The other vote is happening. So the vote's happening right now as we talk, so we're monitoring it to see as it comes over on the House side.
And my last question about this is there's a particular component in there about body-worn cameras. Do you like that component of the legislation so far? I think it would be about $20 million that would be allocated for body cameras towards ICE agents.
Not only do I like it, when I was Attorney General, and even after that, when I worked in our system of higher education, I supported that. I think our law enforcement supported it. It's another policing, good kind of community policing tool. And law enforcement officers want it. They want it as well. And so, yes, I do support that. And I think our ICE officers, absolutely, any law enforcement that's coming into urban areas, they should have those cameras as well.
And then just to, kind of switch the topic, I believe that it's not formally introduced yet, but you are getting ready to introduce legislation for lowering energy costs. If you wouldn't mind sharing that with our viewers of what that legislation is looking to tackle.
I will. So this is a perfect example of where we should be focused on lowering costs for families and finding solutions. Again, back in this Republican tax bill, they took away the energy tax credits from families and builders to build and support energy efficient homes. We know if you have an energy efficient homes, it's going to lower your energy costs. And if you are willing to put an investment in that, then you should get a tax credit. So what my legislation does is bring those tax credits back to say, listen, we are struggling right now with high costs for so many families. Let's make it easier for individuals and families to lower the cost themselves. If they can't rely on a utility or some other place to do it, let them do it. And if they're willing to invest in their home to energy efficiency, which will lower the cost, let's give them a credit for it. Or if a home builder wants to build a smart home or an energy efficient home, let's make sure that they can have a credit for that, or the homeowner gets the credit for purchasing that home. That's good sense. That's common sense for us, and it really works in the long term to lower costs for families as well.
Okay, awesome. And then my last thing for you is, I know you've been very critical about the prediction markets and things that are going on. Can you just kind of explain to folks as well as what you're doing to counteract those measures?
Yeah, most people don't know, and so I'm glad you talked about this, because most people don't understand this of what's happening, particularly in a state like Nevada. To me, Nevada's gaming regulations and the Gaming Commission and the regulatory board that we have, it's the gold standard of gaming in the sense that not only is it regulated, but we also tax it, and we are also ensuring the consumer protection piece of it, right? So we're looking at all pieces of when we are addressing gaming, how do we ensure that we're doing right by everybody that's involved? The poly market is a little different, these contract markets. These are basically offshore, illegal gaming that is taking place online, and people are betting on everything. When I say everything, you can bet how long I'm going to talk. How long is she going to talk in this interview, and people are betting on it. They're betting on how long is the press secretary for the president going to speak, and we're going to bet on how long she's going to do that. The most recent one, and this is why this is a concern, and I'll talk about besides this insider trading, the most recent one was a polymarket bet that was made. There was a bet that said, let's bet whether or not the United States is going to go into Venezuela and remove Maduro. And there was a bet on that. 6 hours before the President of the United States announced that he had removed Maduro, there was a bet placed for $30,000 that Maduro would be removed. 6 hours later, the announcement comes out that President went in, military went in, and they removed him. Whoever bet that won $400,000. To me, that's insider trading. Somebody had military secrets. Somebody knew enough about what was going on to be able to make that bet at the last hour before this announcement came out. That's a problem. More importantly, this betting that is going on, there's no protections. There's no protections for the consumer. The community states at a national level as well, we're missing out on taxes. We know that when you tax gaming in this state, it's going to educate our kids. It's going to good use. We don't know it's going offshore to other places. So there's a lot of concern about not only the lack of regulation, the insider trading, the consumer protection, and how this is being utilized. It is a big concern for me in the United States Senate, and at a federal level, we're looking at this, and I know, and I've been demanding not only for the federal regulatory agencies that have oversight over this to do more, but we need more oversight. We need hearings on this. We need to understand what is going on and call these players in.
Okay, Senator, those were all of my questions. I believe we're almost running out of time here. So is there anything else before we go that you would like to say or add or touch on that we did not get a chance to go over?
No, listen, let me just say thank you. Thank you for the good work that you're doing. I wish you a good year, but I appreciate the opportunity to sit down and talk with you.
Awesome. Likewise, Senator. Thank you. Thank you guys all for joining us here at 2 News Nevada.